Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Tessa Tubbs Podcast, the space where leadership gets real, practical, and deeply personal. I'm so glad you're here. Today's episode is incredibly special to me. I'm joined by someone I've known for decades, a trusted advisor and a wise voice in the leadership space, Andra Brooks. Andra is a psychologist, an executive coach, a consultant whose work has influenced thousands of leaders. She spent her career coaching senior leaders across Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, and entrepreneurial ventures alike. She's the kind of person who not only helps you grow in your role, but in your soul. And over the years, her insights has left a lasting mark on me and so many others. Andra, thank you so much for joining us today.
Tessa, I'm so excited to be here and to have this conversation. I'm really honored that you asked me to join you on your podcast. Thank you.
Well, we are very honored to have you here. So, audience, our theme today is wisdom across a career. What has held true, no matter what the company, the context, or the chaos, and how do we ground ourselves as leaders when everything else keeps changing? So let's dive in. Andra, you've worked with leaders across industries, across time zones, across decades. When you look back over your career, what patterns or lessons have consistently stood out, regardless of company size, industry, or era?
Well, I made some notes, of course, because I prepare. I think the first thing is that context matters. So as a leader, either in a current role or a role that you're seeking, and a lot of my work has been helping prepare leaders take on roles of greater scale, scope, and complexity, that they really need to understand the context. You can be a great leader in one situation and then move to a different situation and not be so great. So really understanding your situation, your context, or the landscape, as you call, of what you are getting yourself into. And that is regardless of the size of company or whether it's a profit or nonprofit kind of company. So I call it situational awareness.
I think that's very poignant, right? Because a lot of times when we move from one role to another, we're moving from a place of strength, of a place of success and accomplishment. And we assume we're going to go to the next place and we'll have the same thing. But I love that call out that we can succeed in one space, but as the circumstances change, may not be as successful. So I'm curious, when you think about the leaders you've worked with, was there like a common blind spot or strength you saw time and time again in those leaders?
Well, I think the blind spot, and I'll coin Marshall Goldsmith. What got you here won't get you. Won't get you where you got. I forget how it said, but
what got you here won't get you there. Yeah.
And so I think it goes to my second pattern, and I'll tie them two together, and that is self-awareness. So understanding the strengths and why you were selected, you're being considered for the next role, is really important. But also having enough self-awareness to say, okay, what's different about this role that I'm going to experience, that I need to make some shifts in how I show up, what behaviors I choose, the situation that I'm in. And so it's leaders that are successful quicker have that and that awareness before they move into the role. And that's a bit of the kind of work that I do, is preparing them for that. I don't think it's I think there's a reason why almost every leadership development program starts with self-awareness, who you are, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, who are you at your core. And that's common in every program, regardless of mid-level, entry level or senior levels. It's just a necessary point for you to understand that before you can move to a bigger role or even be successful in your current role.
That rings true for me as well. The organizations I've been a part of, the high potential programs, leadership programs we've designed, whether it's for an emerging leader or preparation for a C-suite position, it almost always anchors back to self-awareness. So that creates a question for me. Do you ever figure it out? Is there ever an end to the journey of self-awareness from your perspective?
No. I tell people that when you stop learning, you die. And
well, I guess there is an end then.
But it's pretty definitive. But so it goes back to being open to understanding who you are. And there is no
Right.
perfect leader. There's you can't be perfect all the time, and to strive for perfection is a lot of headache for yourself and other people that work with you. So as soon as a leader can understand that there is a growth in a space for them and embrace that, I think they move into the space quicker. Um,
Mm,
the other pattern that I've seen, particularly when I'm preparing leaders to go into bigger roles, is their self identity, which ties to self
mm,
awareness. Those people that can see themselves as that leader, when there's a shift in their
mm,
self concept, they move into that role a lot quicker. I mean, there is a bit of faking it till you make it. Some of the people I work with don't like that. But if we can help them act as if and help them shift into the I am the CEO, or I am the senior leader, I am the department manager, if you will, as if they can see themselves, then they can align their behavior, they can align some of understand how their belief systems toggle to what they're doing, because we're not changing
mm.
those. It's just how do they show up in this particular context.
That's excellent. I love that pattern. So both self-awareness, but self-identity as being key components to accelerating success and making that difference between shifting and pivoting while still growing and developing. That's fantastic. So I want to just pause a little bit for our audience listeners, and I'm going to invite you to take a moment to reflect. Is there something Andra said that rings true for your own journey? And if so, feel free to jot it down. What lesson or pattern stands out most to you? And as we go through the rest of the conversation, we'll have a couple of points where we'll just sort of come back and invite you to apply some of the wise sage that Andra is sharing with us today to your own personal story and journey as well. So, Andra, if you were to distill your lifetime of leadership wisdom into sort of a short list of timeless truths, I know you've talked about self awareness and self identity. Are there any that feel even more relevant now than they did 10 years ago? Or how might these truths be showing up in your own life right now at the stage of career you're in?
I think about leaders today more so than maybe even 10 years ago. There's an element of curiosity and understanding their why, their willingness to take a step back and saying, okay, why did that happen? So being able to lean in and being curious is, I think, one of the things, the truths. Another one would be that we train a lot of leaders with competency models that were created by asking what does good look like, and the most noticeable difference kind of thing. But those are really looking in the rearview mirror. And while we need some kind of framework in which to have a common language in an organization, they're not forward looking. So this curiosity, I think, is important for people to say, okay, I've never experienced this before. I've had some elements that I've experienced before, but what do I know now that I can apply to the future? And then when do I need to pivot going forward? I think that's one of the truths. Then the other piece is communication. Communication is also one of those, nuggets that they teach in leadership development. And a good leader really is a good communicator, because you tell that story. You help shape the story. You help shape how people see the organization and the context. They can motivate and engage and call people to action through their communication skills. And that's the talking part. And then there's the listening part. And I'll stop there to see if you have a comment on those two.
No, I think that's fantastic, and I agree with you. I love the call out of what matters today, and to not get stuck looking in the rearview mirror, but really also spend time looking forward. And sometimes, as you mentioned, it may not be a version of leadership we've seen before, and we may be the person who needs to pioneer that leadership. So be who we desire, right? For someone else to be to ourselves. How can we be that to someone else? So I think the short list you've provided is quite insightful. And I know our audience it gives them an opportunity to think about which of those truths they're already living versus which ones might stretch or challenge them in new ways. And so as we talk about, some of these tripwires, some of these things to sort of focus on, whether it's the historical lens, because there's value to that, right? The self-awareness, a lot of that comes from a historical perspective, but also this forward lens, right? Who do I need to be? Who do I desire to be? What's my self-identity? In your experience, where do most leaders trip up in all of this? And based on where they trip up, what's your go-to advice to them to keep their course correct before it becomes costly?
Well, I think part of the trip up, and I hear it a lot, is I am who I am. You can't change me, or I don't want to change. And I got out of the business of trying to change people, probably a year after I got my doctorate and my license as a psychologist. And I tell people I'm not here to change them. They need to understand, again, who they are. What I'm here to help guide them in understanding how they need to show up now for whatever the task is at hand. And so part of the tripwire, and it all ties together, not to be repetitive, is being not willing. The tripwire is not being willing to change and examine what needs to happen. The other tripwire is really not having a game plan and not understanding the business and how the business makes money. So if you don't understand your why or the company's why, how are you going to be able to create the culture and the behavior and the game plan for other people to follow you?
I like that a lot. And it goes back to what you said earlier, right? About being curious, and not closed off and limited. You mentioned it earlier, even as you talked about that self-identification and the sort of fake it till you make it. And people will say, oh, well, that's not me. I'm curious, how do you connect that dot when you deal with the tripwire of I don't want to change, or people feeling like, how do I behave in this way? It feels awkward, but you mentioned a little bit earlier around connecting them to their values. Tell me a little bit more how you help people navigate that journey when they're performing or feel like they're performing because they're not comfortable with the new behaviors just yet.
Part of it is acknowledging that they're going to be out of their comfort zone. Another part is having them articulate their values. How many people can really tell you what they value? So part of the conversation is what is important to you and how you know that. How has that shown up for you at work and in their personal life? I also believe that you don't turn your personal self off when you come in work. I've had people say, I'm different at home. And I go, oh, I don't think so. But but we'll see. Maybe, maybe I'll suspend my judgment to find that out. And then part of it is looking at the situation. What did you want to get accomplished? What did you do that worked well? What didn't serve you? How is that tied to what you believe? Those are the kind of ongoing conversations that, for me, marry the psychology aspect with the business aspect. Because the work that I do is in the context of a person in a current situation. And I'm really straight with people. I'm a pretty straight shooter, as you know. I'm helping them. The company has hired me to help them be successful in this role or their future role. I'm not here to make them be something that the company doesn't want. And sometimes there's a conversation that the job that they're being talked to, are being considered for, it turns out that they're not really appropriate fit. It takes a lot of guts, self-awareness, courage to say, I don't want that job after all. And sometimes those conversations happen because of the work that we do around the values and understanding the context. And another piece that I'll throw in here is their stakeholders.
And that fits so appropriately, as you mentioned earlier, right? A key truth is around communication. And it's not just, as you shared, people being able to verbalize to themselves what their values are, but to others and those stakeholders. But you also talked about the listening side of that, right? And sort of listening and being attuned to what's happening in an organization. How does an organization make money? How is the organization successful? So they can see how they fit into that ecosystem or not, right? If it's not a fit. When you talk about stakeholders, what's a key element around stakeholder management or stakeholder engagement that you often share with leaders?
So one of the very first exercises I do, early in the coaching anyway, is around having them identify their key stakeholders. Having them identify, doing what is a traditional stakeholder analysis. Why are these people important to them? What's the nature of their relationship? How could they improve the relationship? Which ones, the critical ones they need to focus on, which ones are in maintenance mode. So that gets people thinking about the context and the landscape that they're working in, vis-a-vis what they need to get accomplished and who they need to lead and bring along. The other thing that I ask them to do is, with the top 5 stakeholders that they've been identified, I have them complete an empathy map.
Tell me more about that.
Having them do a deep dive about each stakeholder independently, and having them think through, who is this person? What do they care about? What words would be influential to them? What key messages you want to give to them? And how, what ask you might have of them, and how you're going to get that executed. And so it's really getting them to think more individually about these people that are influential in what they're trying to get accomplished, who they need to also influence the other way around. And people don't do that deep dive. And it is time consuming. And most people come away with, I really don't know this person. I have these assumptions and these biases, and based on maybe experiences in a different context that might not hold true in this situation. And so it's a bit of a muscle that I want leaders to develop in thinking about, again, their landscape, but thinking about the stakeholders and who they need to connect with. And oftentimes people come away with, I need to get to know this person differently. They need to get to know me differently.
That's really good. That's really, really good. It's, I think it's so easy for all of us to fall into that trap, particularly with the speed at which we move through life, that we are sometimes trying to transact and create a win for ourselves. But I think what you're describing in the empathy map, like you said, requires us to slow down, be more thoughtful. And how do we create a win-win out of our relationships and our partnerships and our engagement, and realize that we may not know people as well as we think. Right? So I think that's a fantastic suggestion.
It challenges people to think about, why do I hold these stories about that person? What kind of stories might they hold about me, right?
For sure. Which again takes us back to communication is key, both in what we say and what we're listening to. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Audience members, if anything feels familiar in what Andra's describing, don't worry, you're not alone. What I want to invite you to think about is, what's one small shift you can make this week by staying aligned, avoiding these common missteps, or maybe even putting into action some of the truths that have held through the test of time. Andra, I just want to thank you for bringing such rich perspective to our conversation today. I always say leadership is a long game, right? And having a seasoned guide like you remind us of what actually matters is a real gift. So listeners, if today's conversation sparked something in you, keep the momentum going. Head over to tessatubbs.com, where you'll find a free downloadable resource based on today's conversation with Andra. It's designed to help you apply these insights with actionable tools and reflection prompts. We'd also love to stay connected. You can follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe on YouTube, or check out the website for more leadership resources. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, remember to lead the change you envision. Thanks, Andra, for joining us today.
Thank you, Tessa.